Wait for Kevin to tell us to. All right, give it a clap. Check it out. Got the whole world in my hands. Kind of like Jesus. I am nothing like Jesus. Well, hey guys, welcome to House Parties. We are so thrilled you guys are here with us tonight. Back with me again is Maddie, one of your favorite leaders if you're in our house party. How you doing?
Doing pretty good. How about you?
Good. You got some friends.
I was waiting for you to say hi to the camera because last time I said hello. And every time.
Say hi to the camera.
Hi, camera.
There you go. Actually, you're supposed to say hi to the people behind the camera, but I got what you mean. How you doing?
I'm doing so good. How about you?
Good. You go back to college soon, don't you?
Yeah, in like a month and a half.
A month and a half?
Mm-hmm.
That's wild. My kids go back to school in like a month.
Really?
Yeah.
Really? And that's early for us.
Yeah, they made it a week earlier. Thanks, COVID. Actually, seriously, thank you, COVID. We're really excited to get our kids back in school. Give us a little more free time. But hey, we're thrilled you guys are here. We're going to kick off a new thing today, which we'll tell you guys about in a few minutes. But before we get there, let's do some slices.
Yes. Okay.
What do you got?
Okay. So I found this one. There's a lady who just opened a small business of making jewelry out of teeth.
Oh, you've got to send me these pictures.
People who have died. So it's essentially, she's like a psychologist and she's done work that like, it's supposed to help with the grieving process to have
their teeth.
Yeah. Yeah. So
Wait.
Essentially, I don't know exactly.
Is it like just when you get somebody's ashes in a necklace or something?
Yeah, essentially like that. But the thing I was reading about is that like you have to send her the teeth in order for her to make jewelry. But that's the part that I'm like.
Well, how do you get the teeth? Like, do you just go up to the dead body in the coffin and
yank
rip
it
them out?
I do not know.
And like, what if you're the mortician and you're like, hey, can I have my mom's teeth?
Yeah, to make into earrings.
I'm looking to make some dentures for when I. No. Oh my gosh. Okay, but like, do they actually sell stuff, or is it stuff you can only do with your family?
No, they
like,
sell.
I can go buy
someone
else's teeth?
I don't know about that, actually. That would be freaky.
Okay, I got to do some research, because if so, Stetson, I know what you're getting for Christmas this next year.
Oh my gosh.
Oh man. Okay, well, that's super strange.
Yeah.
I don't really know how to follow that up, but I'll do my best. So for me, my slice. There was a dude in Michigan. He was doing some home renovation at his house, and he had like this sand kind of pit in the backyard, and he's like, you know what, I gotta dig this thing up. And so he began to dig, and then he found a bowling ball. He's like, oh, that's strange. And he continued to dig and dig and dig. The dude unearthed 160 bowling balls from his backyard, and he has no idea how they got there. So I was fascinated because I'm wondering, like, why? And how? Like, how does somebody get 160 bowling balls? And like, I'm thinking, like, the sand pit, they have a picture of it. It's not really all that big. How did it fit this many?
Yeah, that.
And then what do you do? Like, if you dig them all up, you're like, crap, now I have 160 bowling balls. Do you just, like, call the trash company to come pick them up? Like, I'm not really sure, but I'm very intrigued. Like, it kind of makes me want to get 160 bowling balls and bury them in my backyard.
So someone in the future can.
So that in 60 years, somebody can be doing home renovations and just dig them up and be like, wow. Although, you know what I should do instead? What? I should get a bunch of teeth jewelry.
Oh my gosh.
And bury all of that in the backyard.
That would be terrifying.
Yeah, so that like when they find it, they think it's like actually a crime scene and then they're investigating me for something. I don't know. It'd be good. Anyways, that'll do it for slices, guys. If you have a Bible, go ahead and pull it out. We are going to be in the book of Galatians. It's in the New Testament. It comes after 2 Corinthians. It's right before Ephesians, so it's kind of sandwiched in there. It's a letter written by the Apostle Paul to some people who live in a city called Galatia. And the reason we're doing this, like, you know, so we had talked about, before we did the thing on James, that we wanted to just really spend this summer giving you guys an opportunity to dig into God's Word, to dive into it, to just really ask questions. And so I know when we walked through James, it was really good. There was a lot that we learned. And you guys are stinking brilliant, by the way. Like, I know my house party, I've heard from other leaders. You guys, like, really did a great job with this. So congrats. Like, that was awesome. We thought it'd be fun to do it again. And I wanted to pick Galatians because, like, one, I love Paul. I think Paul is absolutely brilliant. Like, he's just a really smart dude. But it's also, honestly, it's probably like one of the most offensive epistles that James wrote, or that Paul wrote. Like, there's some things that he says in here where you read it and you're like, can you say that in the Bible? Like, are you sure? But more than that, like, I think it just does such a really good job of helping us understand like this freedom that Jesus has invited us into, right? Because the problem with Christianity is that sometimes like it just becomes like really religious, which is kind of funny because it's a religion. But we turn it into this thing that's like all about rules and all about regulations and do this, don't do that. And, you know, interestingly enough, that's something that the Jewish people had to deal with a whole lot themselves too. And Paul, like, you know, everybody who was like an early Christian, especially the people here in Galatia, like, they were Jewish, and then they came to realize Jesus was the Messiah, right? He was the one God promised, and so they gave their hearts and their lives to him, but they still struggled with this old pull of Judaism, of trying to do all the things they were supposed to do, thinking that's what was going to make God love them. And so Paul's whole point in this letter is like, no, like I want to talk to you guys about freedom. Because that's what Jesus really came to give us. And so we're going to go through chapter 1 today. So again, if you have your Bible out, go ahead and pull that out. If you got your phone, you can pull up the Bible app. And our goal is not to walk through verse by verse. It's not to just teach it to you guys. It's rather to pull out some things that we think are interesting and fascinating so that we can then hand it off to you in your house parties to really wrestle through this and talk about this and see what Jesus might be showing you through it. So, Maddie, kick us off. What do you see here?
Okay.
And be sure you read the verse. Remember, she's in King James.
Nope, I pulled up my Bible app actually.
Oh, you pulled up the Bible. Good for you.
It's a little running joke in my small group now.
Is
like
it now?
People say this is confusing, and then someone will say, but is it as confusing as Maddie's Bible?
Exactly. Good job, guys. 7 creators, you rock.
So the first one I'm going to point out, it's Galatians 1:6, and it says. This is the NIV version, and it says, I'm astonished that you are so quickly deserting the one who called you to live in the grace of Christ and are turning to a different gospel. I actually wrestled through this verse a lot and read it over and over because obviously in this time it's referring to something different than it would today.
Yep.
But there's still mostly in this version specifically when it says that we're so quickly deserting, because I think it can be super easy to get caught up in when everything is great, you're yeah, I want a relationship with Jesus, he's so good to me, and then something's hard and you're oh, well, I don't know if this is how I want to live anymore. And I know I've been there before. If you don't have tangible ways to pursue Christ when life gets really challenging, it becomes a lot harder to pursue him instead of run the other direction.
Yeah, and for me, what Paul says here, it really kind of follows on the heels of what he says in verse 4, where he says, Jesus gave his life for our sins, just as our God, our Father, planned in order to rescue us from the evil world in which we live, right? That's basically the gospel, right? Jesus loved us, he pursued us so that we could be saved, right? And, Paul's right, far too often, we get distracted, right? We lose sight of this bigger thing that God is doing and this bigger thing he's inviting us into because of some of the stuff that's happening in our lives. And honestly, I think it's because sometimes we lose sight of what Jesus actually did for us, right? Were we to actually sit with that sometimes and be whoa, holy crap, God really loved me. Jesus went to a cross to die for me. And if we actually let that sink in, I don't think we'd be as prone to drift away. But the problem is sometimes we just turn it into a cliche, oh, Jesus loves me, forgave me of my sins, cool, yay God, right? Get out of hell free card, right? I got my fire pass or whatever we want to call it. But if we just sit there, it's oh my God, this is huge. This is massive. And of course Paul would be shocked if people are walking away from this. I mean, we ourselves, I think sometimes we should be shocked if we're walking away from this. And so I think, if anything, this should just be a reminder, man, do we keep the most important things in our life as the most important things? Right? And this may come across as offensive, and I'm sorry, but not sorry. Being a good athlete is not more important than being a good follower of Jesus. And I don't mean good in the sense of oh, I'm a good moral person, but your relationship with Jesus, it's more important than your relationship with baseball or volleyball, right? Your relationship with Jesus, it's more important than being a good student. right? Your relationship with Jesus, it is more important than popularity, than how many people follow you on Snapchat or Instagram or TikTok. Like, literally, this is the most fundamental part of who you are. You are a son or a daughter of the King, and yet far too often for us, it maybe comes a little bit later on the list, where it's like, well, I've got to do school, I've got to do sports and practice and all that. And like, look, all that's really good, but if it's not like the primary thing, if it's not the main thing, we're gonna drift.
Yep.
We are. It just happens.
And that's like another one. It's probably, I mean, I have struggled with this too, but even putting God before other relationships. Like, I have been in friendships that are not great for me, but it kind of goes with popularity, that I was like, I want people more than I want a relationship with God. And at the end of the day, like, community is super important and the Lord wants that for us, but it has to always come below your personal relationship with the Lord.
Yeah. When Paul says something, like, he says some pretty offensive stuff in, like, 8 and 9, which is kind of cool, about just, cursing people who would preach a different gospel. But like, there's this thing that he says in verse 10 that I love. He says, obviously, I'm not trying to win the approval of people, but of God, right? If pleasing people were my goal, I would not be Christ's servant.
Yep.
And like, I think about this for you guys in particular as middle school and high school students. The approval of your friends, like being accepted by your friends, like that is probably one of the most important things for you, right? Like, we all want to be liked. And even as adults, like, we deal with this, right? Like, we want to be loved. We want people to enjoy being around us. Like, we don't want people to hate us. And sometimes, guys, like, following Jesus, it's going to put us on the outside.
Yep.
Right? Like, and look, I've experienced this a ton in my life, right? Where you stand for truth, you speak for truth, you live according to a conviction that, like, God has given you. Like, people don't like that sometimes, right? And it's not that we've got to go and be jerks to people and point out everything that's wrong, but like, our values, they're just going to be different. The things that we want to do, it's just going to be different.
Yep.
And I love what Paul says, because he's like, look, like, the goal, it's not to make people happy. It's to love Jesus. It's to serve Jesus. And like, I realized myself that if I was trying to make people happy, like, I wouldn't even be doing this. Like, I wouldn't even be following Jesus, because it's impossible to do these things.
Yep. Yeah. And it, like, I mean, I can speak to this, like, I have been in friendships with people who love Jesus and then people who don't. And there's this completely different, like, my close friends now, like, it doesn't matter if, like, both of us play sports and both of us, like, those kind of things. If we both have this, like, want to pursue Jesus more, there's automatically this connection.
Yeah.
And then once you have that, like, it becomes a lot easier to be like, it's okay if we don't agree on the smaller things, because we follow the same God. And
well, there's this thing Paul says here in verses like 11 through, I don't know, basically the end of chapter 1 here, and I think it's actually a really cool thing for us to be able to talk about here for a second. Like, there are a lot of people in the world who will challenge the credibility of Christianity, and they'll just go like, oh, it's just like a made-up religion, right? Like, whatever. Which I don't think it is, right? Because we actually have some factual stuff based in history and all that kind of stuff. But Paul here begins to actually tell these Galatian people, like, his story of how he became a Christian. So, Maddie, do you know what Paul was doing before he was like an evangelist, somebody going around telling people about Jesus?
I mean, very briefly, I've studied a little bit, but I mean, he was incredibly judgmental of the church. And
well, before that though, like, he was actually, like, he was a Jewish religious leader. He was a Pharisee, right? And so, like, he loved the Jewish way of understanding God, of seeing God. Like, he had this hope for the Messiah, but then he thought, like, this whole Jesus thing, he thought it was garbage. He thought it was bogus, like. And so what does he say he started doing?
Because he started, that's, what verse is that in here? Because there is one that
it'd be like
I think
13
it's
and
later.
14.
Yeah, where it's like, Yeah, for I've heard of my previous way of life in Judaism, how intensely I persecuted the church of God and tried to destroy it. I was advancing in Judaism beyond many of my own age among my own people, and was extremely zealous for the traditions of my father.
Yeah, so basically, and you can read about this in the book of Acts, Paul was going around with the sanction of the Jewish leaders, literally persecuting the church, persecuting people who followed Jesus, and we actually find out what that persecution looked like. He was killing them. Right? Paul hated Christianity so much that he would go and find the people who were teaching this and proclaiming this, people who said that Jesus was the Messiah, and he would literally murder them. All right, so he straight up hated Christianity. But then something happened, right? There was one day he was on the road down to Damascus, and he was going, and he actually had an encounter with Jesus. And Jesus is like, dude, why are you persecuting me? Why are you doing this? And Paul's eyes were opened, and he saw oh my gosh, I was wrong. Jesus was the Messiah. And so Paul goes from being this guy who was literally killing Christians to a guy who's actually proclaiming Jesus. And what he's telling the Galatians is yo, people, listen, I was that guy, and now I'm this guy, right? I killed people for saying this, and now I'm doing it. Why do you think that is? It's because I know it's real. It's because I know it's true.
Yeah.
And I bring that up because, Paul is a literal figure from history, right? You can read about it in non-Christian early church sources. He was a real dude, right? He existed. And he really was a guy persecuting the church. And then he also really was a guy who was proclaiming Jesus.
Yeah.
It's okay, so if we know all of that, is it possible that this really happened? There is some truth to this whole Christianity thing. And maybe that's a great thing for you guys to talk about. Have you ever had to wrestle through that?
Yeah, I'm super open about my testimony, and when I went to college, and that's why I also brought up that relationships, because I gave up my relationship with the Lord because I wanted to fit in, because people at college wanted to make choices that I didn't feel matched my faith. And so I was having this relationship is more important to me than a faith. And it did not last long because I went down a really, really dark road, and but I think it's also really cool because I know that I was feeling convicted about where I was at long before I found my way back to my relationship with the Lord, because I was after these choices that I've made, I don't know how to pursue the Lord. And so, I love this story because you can never be so far from God's love that you can't be redeemed. Any choice that you make, the Lord still wants a relationship with you. And I can't change the choices that I've made in the past, but I can continue to try my best to pursue him in everything I do now. And that's a little later at the end of this. It's talking about they praised God because of him, because he was sharing and he was preaching. And I was writing a lot about that shows the power of your testimony. Vulnerability can be a really hard thing. And I, for a long time, was I'm not going to share with people the things that I have done because I'm ashamed of it. But this is saying the point of your story is to bring people to the Lord, not for people to praise you. Yeah. As it was saying earlier, pleasing people and sharing your story can show them the love of God, even if it makes them look at you differently. Yeah.
No, and it's good. And I think Paul's life as a whole, it's a testament that, Jesus did something in him, right? And what we're going to see in the rest of Galatians as we continue to walk through it over the next few weeks is that Jesus also wanted to do something through him, right? And it's beautiful. It's amazing. And so Paul sets this whole thing up, setting up his credibility, which I think is really important because it lets us know, if he's credible, then maybe we should take seriously some of the things that he says.
Yep.
Right? If here's this guy who went from being this terrible dude to being this total evangelist, and it was all because of Jesus. Like if his life was like if we can see how different he was before and after, then maybe we should figure out what happened in between. What was that moment? What was that thing, that encounter he had? Because it obviously changed him.
Yep.
All right, so we're going to hand it off to you guys. Our encouragement is simply this. Go through Galatians 1 and just talk about, like, all right, what do we see here? Right? Like, what can we apply to our lives? Like, what do we encourage by? What do we challenge by? And as you guys will see, like, a part of this, it's kind of like a narrative, like a story where Paul's kind of giving a little backstory to people of how he kind of got where he got. And we'll see a little bit more of that next week as well. But even that's really important, too, because it lets us know, like, this is the real dude we can trust.
Yeah.
All right. So, house party leaders, we're going to hand it off to you guys. You know what to do. And we will see you guys next week. Cool. Yeah, we're always trying to get them like around 20 minutes now. So I think we were right around that.
Okay, sweet.
At least I think we were. Maybe 19. Thank you.
Thank you.
It was fun having you here.